The lunch bell rang through Westbrook High School, and within moments the hallways emptied into the cafeteria. Students laughed, talked over one another, and shuffled forward in long lines, balancing backpacks and phones while deciding what to eat. It was the busiest part of the school day, and the room buzzed with the ordinary sounds of teenage life. Daniel Carter stepped inside carrying a blue document folder tucked under his arm. Ethan had accidentally left it on the kitchen table that morning, and it contained a history project due before the end of the day. Daniel had rearranged his work schedule to bring it over himself. As a single father, he was used to changing plans at a moment's notice. Since his wife's death years earlier, there had been no one else to handle unexpected situations. He paused near the entrance and searched the crowded cafeteria for his 16-year-old son. It didn't take long to spot him. Ethan stood patiently in the lunch line, hands in the pockets of his sweatshirt, waiting his turn without pushing ahead. That was typical of him. He was polite, quiet, and rarely drew attention to himself. Daniel smiled. He planned to hand Ethan the folder, remind him to eat well, and head back to work before his afternoon shift resumed. Then a sharp voice broke through the chatter. "Wait, don't take that tray." The cafeteria suddenly felt quieter. Daniel looked toward the serving counter and saw an employee holding Ethan's lunch tray instead of sliding it toward him. Ethan looked confused rather than upset. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "Is something wrong?" The employee frowned. "This meal isn't for you." Students nearby stopped talking. A few exchanged puzzled glances, while others watched without saying a word. One student quietly lowered his phone after starting to record, sensing the situation was becoming uncomfortable. Ethan didn't argue. He simply stepped back from the counter, his face turning red as dozens of classmates looked in his direction. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. His son had always been taught to respect adults, even when they were mistaken. But seeing Ethan standing there, embarrassed and trying to understand what he had done wrong, made every instinct in Daniel tell him to walk forward. He took a slow breath and headed toward the serving line, determined to hear the full story before anyone judged his son. Daniel reached the serving line just as Ethan stepped away from the counter. His son hadn't noticed him yet. His eyes stayed fixed on the floor, and he held the lunch card loosely in one hand, as if wondering whether he had somehow used the wrong one. "Excuse me," Daniel said calmly, approaching the employee. "I'm Ethan's father. Could you tell me what's going on?" The woman looked at him, surprised that a parent had appeared so quickly. "Your son tried to take a meal that isn't assigned to him," she replied. "We're responsible for making sure every student receives the correct lunch. If the system doesn't match, we can't just ignore it." Daniel nodded instead of arguing. "That makes sense, but has anyone checked whether it's a mistake?" The employee hesitated. "The register showed a warning, so I stopped the order." Daniel turned to Ethan. "Did the cashier scan your student ID?" "Yes," Ethan answered quietly. "It beeped, then she called someone over. I thought maybe the computer was slow." His voice carried no anger, only confusion. Daniel had spent enough years dealing with paperwork, payroll systems, and computer errors to know that technology wasn't perfect. A warning on a screen didn't always tell the whole story. Another cafeteria worker, who had been arranging fruit cups nearby, stepped closer. "I remember this student," she said. "He comes through almost every day. I've never seen any problems before." The first employee glanced at the computer again and frowned. "That's strange." By now, several students had returned to eating, though a few continued watching from nearby tables. The atmosphere had shifted from curiosity to quiet concern. Daniel kept his tone respectful. "I'm not asking for special treatment," he said. "I only want to know why my son was stopped before everyone assumed he had done something wrong." The cafeteria manager walked over after hearing the conversation. "Let's check his account instead of guessing," she said. Within seconds, the office computer displayed Ethan's lunch record. The manager's expression changed. "It looks like the system attached another student's account to his ID this morning after a database update." For a brief moment, no one spoke. The silence carried a simple but important truth. Sometimes the biggest misunderstandings begin with the smallest errors. The cafeteria manager looked from the computer screen to Ethan and let out a quiet sigh. "I'm sorry," she said. "Your account is completely fine. The system accidentally linked your student ID to another student's record after this morning's software update." The words seemed to lift a weight from Ethan's shoulders, but the embarrassment on his face remained. An explanation could correct the mistake, yet it couldn't erase the feeling of being singled out in front of dozens of classmates. The cafeteria employee who had stopped him looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I should have asked a few more questions before assuming the problem was with you," she admitted. "I'm sorry, Ethan." Ethan gave a small nod. "It's okay." Daniel knew his son well enough to recognize that those two words didn't mean everything was okay. Ethan simply didn't like making situations more difficult than they already were. The manager turned to the students who had witnessed the exchange. "There was a technical error," she announced clearly. "Ethan followed every rule. He did nothing wrong." Several students exchanged glances. One boy quietly put away the phone he had been using to record. Another student walked over to Ethan. "Hey," he said, "do you want to sit with us today?" Ethan looked surprised before offering a grateful smile. "Thanks." Daniel watched the moment with relief. Teenagers could be quick to judge, but they could also be quick to show kindness once they understood the truth. Before leaving, the cafeteria employee handed Ethan a fresh lunch tray. "I hope you'll accept my apology," she said sincerely. "I do," Ethan replied. "Everyone makes mistakes." His answer caught Daniel off guard. It wasn't rehearsed or forced. It was simply the kind of response that reflected the values they had tried to live by at home. As father and son walked toward an empty table, Daniel placed the blue folder beside Ethan's tray. "You almost forgot this," he said with a smile. Ethan laughed softly, the tension finally beginning to fade. "Thanks, Dad." Daniel realized that while he couldn't protect his son from every misunderstanding, he could teach him something even more valuable. Stay calm, seek the facts, and treat people with respect, even when they've been unfair. Sometimes the strongest response isn't the loudest one. It's choosing patience until the truth has a chance to be heard. Daniel stayed in the cafeteria until Ethan had finished eating. They talked about the history project, weekend plans, and the small things that usually filled their conversations. Neither of them mentioned the misunderstanding again, but Daniel could tell his son was still thinking about it. As students began returning their trays, the cafeteria manager walked over carrying a clipboard. "Mr. Carter," she said, "would you have a few minutes to speak with me before you leave?" Daniel agreed. Inside the manager's office, she apologized once more for what had happened. "We've already contacted the district's technology department about the database error," she explained. "But that's only part of the problem. We also need to remind our staff not to jump to conclusions when something doesn't look right." Daniel appreciated her honesty. "I know mistakes happen," he replied. "What matters is how we respond after we realize we've made one." The manager nodded. "Would you be willing to share your perspective at next month's parent advisory meeting? I think hearing from a parent could help us improve our procedures." Daniel smiled politely. "If it helps prevent another student from feeling embarrassed, I'd be glad to." Over the next few weeks, the school introduced a simple change. Whenever a student's meal account showed an unexpected error, staff members would quietly verify the information before speaking to the student in front of others. It took only a few extra moments, but it protected students from unnecessary embarrassment while allowing employees to solve problems more respectfully. Ethan noticed the difference too. One afternoon, he told his father, a freshman had an issue with his lunch card today. They asked him to step aside, check the computer, and fixed it without making a scene. Daniel smiled. "That's how it should be." Months later, the incident had faded from most people's memories, but its lesson remained. Technology can fail. People can make incorrect assumptions. Yet patience, respectful communication, and a willingness to admit mistakes can turn an uncomfortable moment into an opportunity for growth. As they drove home that evening, Ethan looked out the window before quietly saying, "I'm glad you came to school that day." Daniel glanced at him and smiled. "So am I." Sometimes the greatest lesson a parent teaches isn't found in a speech or a punishment. It's shown through calm actions, careful listening, and the courage to seek the truth before reaching a conclusion.